The mob has killed thousands of people across American history. Judges, reporters, rival bosses, innocent bystanders, and their own men. Most of those murders were eventually traced back to someone, a conviction, a confession, a deathbed admission. The killers got caught, or they didn't, but at least the picture became clear. These 10 cases never got there. The murders on this list involve some of the most powerful and dangerous people in the history of organized crime in America. Men who built Las Vegas, men who ran entire cities, men who ordered hundreds of killings and somehow died the same way their victims did, shot without warning by people they never saw coming. In every single case, nobody was ever convicted. Some remain open investigations today. Others are so cold they may never be touched again. Today, we're covering 10 Mafia hits that were never officially solved, and in most cases, never will be. Arnold Rothstein. Arnold was 46 years old, rich beyond what most people could imagine, and sitting in his usual booth at Lindy's restaurant on Broadway when a phone call came in at 10:15 p.m. on November 4, 1928. He took the call, came back to the table, handed his pearl-handled pistol to his associate James Meehan, and walked out into the night alone. He was headed to room 349 at the Park Central Hotel on 7th Avenue. He never walked out of that building on his own 2 feet. Rothstein had been born in Manhattan on January 17, 1882, to a well-off Jewish family. His father, Abraham, was an honest businessman so respected in his community that people called him Abe the Just. Arnold was the opposite of his father from the start. He dropped out of school at 16, spent his teenage years in pool halls, and by age 20 was booking bets on horse races, baseball games, and elections. By 30, he was a millionaire and owned his own casino in Midtown Manhattan. What made Rothstein different from every other criminal in New York was his brain. He didn't just muscle people or rob them. He thought. He loaned money to politicians, judges, and police officers, and collected favors, not just cash. He had dirt on half of New York and protection from the other half. Meyer Lansky once said of him, "Rothstein had the most remarkable brain. He understood business instinctively." Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, Bugsy Siegel, and Lansky himself all came up under Rothstein's shadow. He didn't just run a criminal operation. He built the blueprint that organized crime in America would follow for the next 50 years. His most notorious move came in 1919. 8 players on the Chicago White Sox accepted money to throw the World Series against the Cincinnati Reds in what became known as the Black Sox scandal. Rothstein was widely suspected of bankrolling the fix, and most historians believe he bet over $250,000 on Cincinnati to win. When called before a grand jury, he denied everything, shifted blame to his associate Abe Attell, and walked away clean. The 8 White Sox players were banned from baseball for life. Rothstein faced no punishment at all. By the late 1920s, Rothstein had branched into drug trafficking, heroin, and cocaine on a scale nobody in American organized crime had attempted before. Federal agents estimated that by 1928, the amounts of drugs being seized at U.S. Customs had risen dramatically from just a few years earlier. Rothstein was behind much of it. He was also deeply involved in bootlegging, real estate, and loan sharking. His estate at the time of his death was valued at between $1 million and $3 million, worth between $18 million and $54 million today. Then came September 1928, and a poker game that changed everything. The game was held at an apartment at 161 West 54th Street and lasted 13 hours. The other players included George "Hump" McManus, a gambler who had organized the game, and Titanic Thompson, a legendary card hustler from the Midwest. Rothstein lost somewhere between $320,000 and $350,000. Sources vary on the exact figure, but it was roughly $6 million in today's money. He signed iOS and walked out. Then he refused to pay, claiming the game had been fixed against him. For a man who had made his fortune fixing games, being on the other end of one was apparently more than he could stand. McManus, as the game's organizer, was responsible for collecting Rothstein's debt and paying out the winners. He pressured Rothstein for weeks. Rothstein stalled, telling the players he expected to collect $550,000 in election bets after Herbert Hoover won the presidency in November, and would pay everyone then. The other gamblers weren't satisfied. On the night of November 4th, McManus, registered at the Park Central Hotel under the fake name George Richards, called Rothstein at Lindy's and summoned him to room 349. Rothstein went alone and unarmed, having left his pistol with Meehan. Police later theorized that the presence of McManus's brother Thomas, a former police detective in the room, made Rothstein feel safe enough to come without protection. What happened inside room 349 will never be fully known. At some point shortly after Rothstein arrived, a single shot from a .38 caliber Colt revolver hit him in the lower abdomen, severing an artery. The gun was thrown out the window, where it bounced off the hood of a parked taxi and landed in the street. Hotel employees found Rothstein on the service stairs, holding his stomach and asking for a cab. A police officer arrived, called an ambulance, and Rothstein was taken to New York Polyclinic Hospital. Police detective Patrick Floyd, who knew Rothstein, came to the hospital and asked who shot him. Rothstein put his finger to his lips. Later, when officers pushed harder, his answer was, "You stick to your trade, I'll stick to mine." He never said another useful word. He lost consciousness, never regained it, and died at approximately 10:20 a.m. on November 6, 1928, Election Day, the day he had been counting on to collect $570,000 in political bets. His death canceled every wager. George McManus was arrested weeks later in a Broadway barber shop, having arranged his own surrender. His coat, with his name sewn inside it, had been found in room 349. 2 witnesses placed him in the hotel that night. It didn't matter. No witness could put him in the room at the exact moment of the shooting. He was acquitted. The murder of Arnold Rothstein has never been officially solved. It remains an open case to this day, nearly 100 years later. The police investigation was, by most accounts, a disaster. Hundreds of pages of Rothstein's personal papers, documents that reportedly contained compromising information on politicians, judges, and film stars, went missing before investigators could secure them. Rothstein's own estate attorney told reporters at the time, "When Rothstein's safe deposit boxes are opened, there will be a lot of suicides." Those boxes were opened. No suicides followed. The records that might have explained the full picture of who wanted Rothstein dead were simply gone. What's left are theories. McManus in a drunken rage, a contract ordered by Dutch Schultz, a double cross tied to a drug deal involving Legs Diamond. None proven, all possible. The man who built organized crime in America died in a hospital bed on Election Day, having refused to give up his killer right to the end. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Bugsy Siegel. Benjamin Siegel was born on February 28, 1906, in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, the second of 5 children of Russian Jewish immigrants. His family was poor. By his early teens, he was extorting pushcart peddlers on the Lower East Side, dousing their carts in kerosene if they refused to pay. He met Meyer Lansky as a teenager, and the two formed what became known as the Bugs and Meyer mob,
running bootlegging and gambling operations across New York. By his late 20s, Siegel was a founding member of Murder, Inc., the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate, and was widely believed to have personally killed more than 30 men. In 1936, Siegel moved to Los Angeles. He was sent by Lansky and the syndicate to expand the mob's West Coast operations, gambling, narcotics, and the race wire service that fed results to bookmakers across the country. While doing that, he also carved out a genuine celebrity life. Actor George Raft, his childhood friend from Brooklyn, introduced him to Hollywood. Jean Harlow became the godmother to his daughter, Millicent. He threw parties at his Beverly Hills home, attended by Cary Grant and Clark Gable. He was handsome, charming, and extremely violent. And somehow those things coexisted without too much trouble for most of a decade. Then came the Flamingo. In 1945, Siegel became consumed with the idea of building a luxury hotel casino in Las Vegas. Nevada had legalized gambling, and Siegel saw what almost nobody else saw at the time, that the desert could become something. He took over a struggling project from developer William R. Wilkerson and assumed control of construction. The syndicate, primarily Lansky and Lucky Luciano, put in money expecting to see returns. The original budget was approximately $1.5 million. Construction costs eventually reached over $6 million. Mob investors were furious. There were persistent reports that Siegel and Virginia Hill, his girlfriend, who worked as a courier for the syndicate, had been skimming construction money and wiring it to a Swiss bank account in Hill's name. The Flamingo opened on December 26, 1946, during an unusual winter rainstorm, and the launch was a disaster. The hotel portion wasn't finished, so guests had nowhere to sleep. The casino lost money. The syndicate closed it in February 1947. It reopened on March 1st and slowly began turning a profit. By May 1947,
the Flamingo had reportedly made $250,000, but the damage to Siegel's standing with the syndicate's leadership had already been done. On the evening of June 20, 1947, Siegel was at 810 North Linden Drive in Beverly Hills, the mansion he had leased for Virginia Hill. Hill was not there. The two had argued, and she had left for Paris about a week earlier. The lease on the house was due to expire in 3 days. Siegel had flown in from Las Vegas to pick up some clothing and personal items while waiting for his daughters to arrive by train from New York. That evening, he sat on a chintz-covered sofa in the living room with his associate, Alan Smiley, reading a copy of the Los Angeles Times. A table lamp illuminated him from the side. The drapes were open. At approximately 10:45 p.m., someone positioned outside the window, crouching at a rose-covered trellis just 14 feet from where Siegel sat, fired 9 rounds from a .30 caliber M1 carbine through the glass. 4 bullets hit Siegel. 2 struck him in the head, 2 in the torso. One of the headshots drove his right eye out of its socket and across the tile floor, where it landed 15 feet away. Siegel was killed instantly. Alan Smiley, sitting next to him, was grazed on the arm when 3 bullets passed through his jacket sleeve. He survived. The shooter disappeared. Within minutes of the shooting, 3 men, Davy Berman, Gus Greenbaum, and Morris Rosen, walked into the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas and announced they were taking over management. The timing was not a coincidence. Beverly Hills Police, the LAPD, and the FBI all investigated. 9 shell casings were found scattered across the driveway of the neighboring property. One of the guns used was recovered in a trash basket near the hotel the day after the murder. Neither led to an arrest. The Beverly Hills Police Department classified the case as open, and it remains open today. Researchers cannot access the investigation file because it is an active case.
Who ordered the hit has been debated for nearly 80 years. The most widely cited theory is that the syndicate's East Coast leadership, primarily Lansky, Luciano, and Frank Costello, authorized the killing because of the cost overruns and suspected skimming. According to West Coast mob figure Jimmy "the Weasel" Fratiano, LA Mafia boss Jack Dragna ordered the actual hit and assigned it to a mobster named Frankie Carbo. That account was detailed in the 1981 book The Last Mafioso by Ovid Demaris. Former Philadelphia mob boss Ralph Natale, who later became a government witness, told journalist Larry McShane he also believed Carbo carried out the killing on Lansky's orders. A separate theory centers on Mose Sedway, Siegel's longtime associate, who served as vice president of the Flamingo and reported its finances back to Lansky. In March 1947, Siegel had allegedly threatened to kill Sedway at a mob meeting, saying he would have him shot and fed to the kitchen garbage disposal. Sedway's son Robbie later told Los Angeles Magazine that his mother Bee had claimed she contacted her lover, a crane operator named Matthew "Moose" Panza, after learning of the threat, and that Panza may have been the shooter. Panza died 3 months after Siegel. The theory has never been confirmed. A Beverly Hills forensic specialist named Clark Fogg, who analyzed the case decades later and co-authored the 2013 book Beverly Hills Confidential, argued there were likely 2 shooters based on the trajectory of the bullets. He pointed to 2 hitmen known as the 2 Tonys, Tony Brancato and Tony Trombino, as possible triggermen, hired by mobster Joe Adonis. None of these theories has ever produced a charge or a conviction. The Beverly Hills Police Department has never publicly named a suspect. Siegel was buried on June 26, 1947, in a silver-plated casket at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. 5 people attended the funeral, none of his close mob associates among them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case on this list involves a murder that was committed in broad daylight in a hotel barbershop in front of a room full of witnesses, and somehow, every single one of them managed to forget what they saw. Albert Anastasia. On the morning of October 25, 1957, Albert Anastasia got a haircut. He sat down in the 4th chair at Grasso's barbershop on the ground floor of the Park Sheraton Hotel at 877th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. His barber, Joseph Bocchino, draped a cloth over him and placed a hot towel over his face. A manicurist sat beside the chair working on his nails. A shoeshine boy worked on his brown, wing-tipped shoes. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning. His bodyguard and driver, Anthony Coppola, had dropped him off and parked the car in an underground garage. Then he took a walk. He left Anastasia, the boss of the Gambino crime family, co-founder of Murder, Inc., a man who had personally ordered hundreds of killings, completely alone. 2 men walked in. They had scarves pulled over their faces, fedoras on, and sunglasses. They shoved the barber out of the way and opened fire. Bullets hit Anastasia in the head, back, hip, and hand. He lunged out of the chair and charged directly at his killers, but in the confusion, he was attacking their reflections in the mirror. He fell to the floor, dead. The shooters walked out and disappeared into the city. 14 people were in or near that barbershop. 100 detectives were eventually assigned to the case. Nobody was ever charged. The murder of Albert Anastasia remains officially unsolved. Anastasia was born Umberto Anastasio on September 26, 1902, in Calabria in southern Italy. His father was a railway worker who died after World War I, leaving 9 sons and 3 daughters. Anastasia was 15 when he left Italy, taking a job on a freighter with his brother Tony. When the ship docked at the Brooklyn waterfront, the 2 of them slipped off and never went back. They had no shoes when they arrived. They found work as longshoremen on the same docks they'd just snuck onto. Anastasia was arrested for murder in 1921.
convicted, and sent to Sing Sing to await execution. Before they could electrocute him, he won a retrial. By then, 4 of the key witnesses against him had disappeared. The remaining witnesses changed their stories. The case collapsed. He walked out. He also changed his name from Anastasio to Anastasia to spare his family the embarrassment, a detail that says a great deal about what he planned to do with the rest of his life. By the late 1920s, he controlled 6 Brooklyn chapters of the International Longshoremen's Association, which gave him a stranglehold on the entire Brooklyn waterfront. No ship unloaded without his permission. No worker got hired without going through him. He aligned with Lucky Luciano, and in 1931, he was one of the gunmen present at the killing of mob boss Joe Masseria at a Coney Island restaurant. The hit that ended the Castellamarese War and allowed Luciano to reshape American organized crime from the ground up. Anastasia's reward was co-leadership of Murder, Inc., the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate. Murder, Inc. was exactly what it sounds like, a squad of killers available for contract hits on behalf of organized crime families across the country. One informant estimated the group was responsible for at least 63 murders. Other estimates run much higher, up to 700 total. Anastasia wasn't just in charge. He was the most feared man in the room in an organization full of killers. He became formal boss of his own family in 1951, after his boss, Vincent Mangano, disappeared and Mangano's brother Philip was found shot dead in a Brooklyn marshland. Anastasia told the commission that Mangano had been planning to kill him first. Nobody pushed back. Anastasia took over. By 1957, though, the ground was moving under him. Vito Genovese, the boss of the Genovese family, wanted to be the dominant power in New York and had already moved against Anastasia's ally, Frank Costello, who was shot in the lobby of his apartment building in May 1957. Costello survived, but immediately stepped down as boss. His own underboss, Carlo Gambino, had quietly switched sides and was working with Genovese against him. Anastasia was also making enemies by reportedly attempting to muscle in on Cuban casino operations controlled by Santo Traficante Jr. He was surrounded and didn't know it. On the morning of October 25th, he came in for his regular haircut. The NYPD concluded that Genovese and Gambino had ordered the hit. The most persistent theory named Crazy Joe Gallo as the leader of the trigger crew. Gallo later bragged to an associate, "From now on, you can just call the 5 of us the Barbershop Quintet." That quote was reported by New York Magazine in 1972. But Gallo was never charged. A Gambino family capo named Michael DiLeonardo later told investigators that the actual shooters were Gambino associates Steve Armone and Steven Gramauda, based on what he'd been told inside the family. But again, no charges ever followed. A gun was recovered from a trash basket near the hotel the day after the murder. It didn't lead anywhere. The barber chair Anastasia died in was later auctioned for $7,000. In 2012, it became a permanent exhibit at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. The barbershop itself is now a Starbucks. After the murder, the Park Sheraton reupholstered the remaining chairs and repositioned them to face away from the mirrors. Genovese, who thought he was now the top man in New York, lasted barely 2 years before being convicted on narcotics charges in 1959 and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Carlo Gambino, who had helped set the whole thing in motion, went on to run the most powerful crime family in America for the next 2 decades.
He never spent a day in prison for Anastasia's murder. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case moves from New York to the Nevada desert, where the mob's most important casino operator and his wife were found with their throats cut in their own home. And the killers walked in without breaking a single window. Gus and Bess Greenbaum. On the night of December 2nd, 1958, Bess Greenbaum drove her housekeeper, Pearl Ray, home.
It was a routine she did every evening, a 4-mile round trip through the quiet streets of Phoenix's Encanto neighborhood. Bess was back home within about 12 minutes. By the time Pearl arrived for work the next morning, both Bess and her husband Gus were dead inside the house. Pearl found Bess first. She was lying face down on a couch in the den, fully dressed, her wrists tied behind her back with a cheap necktie. Her skull had been fractured, most likely by a decorative glass bottle found nearby. Her throat had been cut with a 9-inch butcher knife. The killer had gripped the knife through a cellophane bag to avoid leaving fingerprints. Pillows had been placed beside her head. Gus was 50 feet away in the master bedroom, sprawled across the twin beds in his beige silk pajamas, the television still on. He had been struck twice in the head, and his throat was slashed nearly to the point of decapitation. A money clip with over $1,400 was still in his pocket. Around $2,000 in cash and a 3-carat diamond ring were missing. No windows had been broken. No doors had been forced. Whoever killed them had walked straight in. Gus Greenbaum was born in Chicago in 1893 and came up through the ranks of organized crime during Prohibition, eventually managing the Southwest Division of the Transamerica Wire Service, the mob's system for distributing race results to bookmakers, out of an office in Phoenix's Lures Tower.
He built relationships with local politicians and businessmen across Arizona throughout the 1930s and 1940s, becoming one of the Chicago outfit's most trusted operators in the Southwest. When Bugsy Siegel was shot dead in Beverly Hills in June 1947, the Flamingo Casino in Las Vegas was drowning in debt. The mob needed someone who could actually run a casino, not just build one. They called Gus Greenbaum. He flew to Las Vegas within hours of Siegel's death, took over the Flamingo, and had it turning a profit within months. In the years that followed, he ran several other syndicate casinos and became one of the most powerful figures in Las Vegas. People called him the Mayor of Paradise, Paradise being the unincorporated township in Clark County that included the Strip. In 1955, Greenbaum retired to Phoenix. He was done. He had a nice house, a wife, and no interest in going back. The mob had other plans. The Chicago outfit needed someone to take over the Riviera Hotel, which was losing money. According to mob journalist Ed Becker, an outfit enforcer named Marshall Caifano flew to Phoenix and gave Greenbaum a straightforward message: come back to work or be carried out in a box. Greenbaum went back to Las Vegas. He improved the Riviera's numbers, but his personal life was falling apart. He had developed serious addictions to heroin and gambling and was drinking heavily. He was erratic. He was stealing from his own associates. FBI records and multiple mob historians confirm that Greenbaum was skimming money from casino operations that belonged to the outfit and to Meyer Lansky's associates. For the mob, this was not a recoverable situation. 5 days before the murders, a secret meeting of organized crime figures took place at a ranch near Tucson owned by Detroit mob boss Pete Licavoli. Phoenix police later theorized that the decision to kill Greenbaum was finalized at that meeting. Jimmy Fratiano, a West Coast mob figure who later became a government witness, told mob associate Johnny Roselli that Meyer Lansky had ordered the contract because Greenbaum's behavior was costing the Flamingo's silent partners money. Fratiano reportedly said, "That was Meyer's contract." The night of the murders, cigarette ashes and footprints near the garage suggested that 2 men had waited outside while Bess drove Pearl home. When she left, they entered the house, killed Gus, and waited for Bess to return. When she came back, they hit her over the head, tied her up, and cut her throat. Phoenix police said they had recovered some fingerprints from the scene and were running checks. Nothing ever came of it. Detectives believed the killers had flown in from Miami and left immediately after. 2 unidentified men had arrived in Phoenix that day and were seen departing from Miami shortly after the murders. Nobody was ever arrested. Nobody was ever charged.
Greenbaum's funeral in Phoenix drew several hundred people, including Arizona Senator and future presidential candidate Barry Goldwater, with whom Greenbaum had cultivated a relationship during his years running the outfit's Southwest operations. Rabbi Albert Plotkin spoke at the service without mentioning the circumstances of Gus's death. The mob's casino men flew back to Las Vegas the same day to figure out who would run the Riviera next. Several theories have circulated about who actually carried out the killings. Phoenix police focused on out-of-town professionals. Some investigators pointed to Milner Jarvis, a man Greenbaum had helped send to prison in 1948 for stealing $45,000 from Flamingo operations, as a possible suspect. Others maintained it was a pure mob execution, ordered from above and carried out by hitmen who were never identified and never came back to Phoenix. Veteran Las Vegas journalist John L. Smith, who has researched the case extensively, described the situation plainly. It wasn't the Boy Scouts. The case has been cold for over 65 years. Gus and Bess Greenbaum are buried in bronze caskets a few feet apart at Beth Israel Cemetery in Phoenix. Their killers have never been publicly identified. What makes this murder particularly grim is that Bess had nothing to do with any of it. She ran charities. She drove her maid home every night. She came back to her own house and walked into something she had no part in creating. She was killed because she came home at the wrong time, and because whoever came to kill her husband decided she couldn't be left as a witness. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a man who was arguably the most powerful labor leader in American history and who vanished from a suburban Detroit parking lot in the middle of the afternoon without leaving a single body behind. Jimmy Hoffa. At 2:15 p.m. on July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa called his wife Josephine from a payphone outside the Matches Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. He told her nobody had shown up for his meeting. That was the last phone call he ever made. His car was found abandoned and unlocked in the parking lot. He was never seen again. Hoffa was 62 years old. He had spent his life building the International Brotherhood of Teamsters into the largest union in the United States, with over 2 million members at its peak. He had also spent years cultivating deep relationships with organized crime figures who used the Teamsters Pension Fund, which the FBI later called the most abused, misused pension fund in America, as their own private bank. By 1975, those two facts had put him on a collision course that he didn't survive. James Riddle Hoffa was born on February 14, 1913, in Brazil, Indiana. His father died when Jimmy was 7. The family moved to Detroit when he was about 11. He left school young and started working in warehouses, and by his early 20s was organizing workers into the Teamsters Union with a ferocity that made enemies and built loyalty in equal measure. By 1957, he was the Teamsters' national president. He negotiated the first national freight agreement in 1964, which standardized pay rates for truckers across the country. Workers loved him for it. The federal government had a different view. Robert Kennedy, as chief counsel of the Senate Rackets Committee in the late 1950s, made going after Hoffa a personal mission. Kennedy believed Hoffa was using the union to enrich mob figures and himself. In 1964, Hoffa was convicted on 1 count of conspiracy and 3 counts of mail and wire fraud related to improper use of the Teamsters Pension Fund. He received a combined sentence of 13 years. In 1971, President Richard Nixon commuted his sentence, and Hoffa was released after serving less than 5 years. There was a condition attached to the commutation, one that became central to everything that followed. Hoffa was barred from union activities until 1980. Hoffa ignored it. Almost immediately after his release, he began working to get back the Teamsters' presidency. The mob had installed their own man, Frank Fitzsimmons, in his absence, and they had no intention of letting Hoffa reclaim control of a pension fund worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Hoffa pushed anyway. By the summer of 1975, Hoffa had arranged a meeting at the Machis Red Fox to try to smooth things over with two men. Anthony "Tony Jack" Giacalone, a top figure in the Detroit Mafia, and Anthony "Tony Pro" Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamsters official and a capo in the Genovese crime family. The FBI's own internal briefing document, a 56-page report called the Hoffex Memo, prepared in January 1976 and published in full by the Detroit Free Press in 2006, concluded that Hoffa was murdered on behalf of organized crime figures who saw his return to the Teamsters as a direct threat to their control of the pension fund. Neither Giacalone nor Provenzano showed up at the restaurant, or at least that's what both men told investigators. Giacalone claimed he had spent the afternoon at the Southfield Athletic Club, about 5 miles from the Red Fox. Provenzano said he was playing cards in New Jersey. Neither alibi was ever disproven, and neither man was ever charged. The FBI's investigation was enormous. More than 200 agents were assigned across multiple cities. Over 70 volumes of files were compiled, more than 16,000 pages of documents. Police dogs tracked Hoffa's scent from the parking lot to the back seat of a maroon 1975 Mercury Marquis owned by the son of Anthony Giacalone. A strand of Hoffa's hair was recovered from that back seat. Charles "Chucky" O'Brien, a longtime Hoffa associate and close friend of the Giacalone family, was identified as likely having driven that car on the day of the disappearance. O'Brien denied involvement. He was never charged. The body has never been found. Theories about its location have multiplied for 50 years. A hitman named Donald Francos claimed Hoffa was buried beneath the end zone at Giants Stadium in New Jersey. A government witness named Charles Allen told a Senate committee that Hoffa's body was ground into pieces and shipped to Florida to be disposed of in a swamp. FBI searches have been conducted at a horse farm in Michigan, under a driveway in Roseville, and at multiple other sites. Every search has come up empty. Hoffa was legally declared dead on July 30, 1982, exactly 7 years after he disappeared, by an Oakland County probate judge. The declaration had no body attached to it, no crime scene, and no named perpetrator. The FBI's Detroit field office marked the 50th anniversary of his disappearance in July 2025 with a public statement confirming the case remains open. The most widely accepted theory, consistent with the Hoffex memo, is that Hoffa was picked up from the parking lot, driven to a location nearby, killed, and disposed of in a way that left no physical trace. A reformed Detroit mobster named Nov Toko, described as the highest-ranking organized crime figure to ever cooperate with federal authorities in Michigan, told NBC Chicago in 2025, "I believe that people do know what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. We know who perpetuated it and how it was done. Nobody has ever been arrested. Nobody has ever been charged. The case remains officially open with the FBI 50 years later." What makes it different from every other case on this list is the absence of a body. Every other murder here left something behind: a crime scene, a chair, a parking lot with blood on the floor. Hoffa left a payphone call, an unlocked car, and 50 years of questions that nobody in a position to answer them has ever been willing to ask out loud. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case takes us to a birthday dinner in Little Italy, Manhattan, where a mob boss arrived with his new wife to celebrate turning 43 and was shot dead before the food arrived. Crazy Joe Gallo. Joseph "Crazy Joe" Gallo was born on April 7, 1929, in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn. He was the same age his whole life, because he died on his 43rd birthday in the early hours of the morning at a table in a Little Italy restaurant with his wife sitting beside him. Gallo came up in the Profaci crime family, the organization that would later be renamed the Colombo family, alongside his brothers Larry and Albert. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia at age 21.
His reputation for violence and unpredictability earned him the nickname Crazy Joe, though those who knew him said he hated being called that. He was also, by all accounts, genuinely intelligent. During his years in prison, he reportedly read up to 8 books a day and taught himself to paint. In 1957, Joe Profaci allegedly tasked Gallo's crew with murdering Albert Anastasia, the boss of the Gambino family, at a midtown Manhattan barbershop. Anastasia was killed that October. Nobody was charged. By 1961, Gallo had grown furious with Profaci, believing the boss was keeping too large a cut of the family's earnings for himself. On February 27, 1961, Gallo and his brothers took the extraordinary step of kidnapping 4 of Profaci's top men: underboss Joseph Magliocco, Profaci's brother Frank, Captain Salvatore Musacchia, and soldier John Scimone. Profaci himself escaped. After a few weeks of tense negotiation, the hostages were released, but Profaci never honored the deal. He immediately ordered the murders of Gallo crew members, including Joseph "Joe Jelly" Gioielli. A Profaci hitman also tried to strangle Larry Gallo in a Brooklyn bar. A police officer walking in saved Larry's life. The conflict, known as the First Colombo War, produced 9 murders and 3 disappearances before a ceasefire was negotiated in 1963. Gallo wasn't part of those negotiations. He was in prison, having been convicted of conspiracy and extortion in November 1961 and sentenced to 7 to 14 years. When he was released on April 11, 1971, he argued the 1963 peace agreement didn't apply to him because he'd been locked up when it was made. The new boss, Joseph Colombo, offered him $1,000 as a gesture of goodwill. Gallo demanded $100,000. Colombo refused. The war wasn't over. On June 28, 1971, at an Italian-American Civil Rights League rally at Columbus Circle in Manhattan, a 24-year-old black man named Jerome Johnson walked up to Joseph Colombo and shot him 3 times in the head. Colombo's bodyguards immediately shot Johnson dead. Colombo survived but was left paralyzed. He died in May 1978 from the lingering effects of his injuries. The Colombo family leadership was convinced Gallo had orchestrated the shooting. Police investigated and concluded Johnson had acted alone. That official conclusion did nothing to stop the Colombo family from deciding Gallo needed to die. By early 1972, Gallo had reinvented himself publicly. He was spending time with actors, comedians, and New York celebrities. His friend Jerry Orbach, who had played a character based loosely on Gallo in the 1971 film The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, introduced him around. 3 weeks before his death, on March 11, 1972, Gallo married 29-year-old actress Sina Esseri and became stepfather to her 10-year-old daughter, Lisa. On the night of April 7, 1972, Gallo took his new family out to celebrate his birthday. They went first to the Copacabana nightclub on East 60th Street to watch comedian Don Rickles perform. Gallo invited Rickles to join them for dinner afterward. Rickles declined. After the show, Gallo's group, his wife Sina, her daughter Lisa, his sister Carmela, his bodyguard Pete the Greek Diopoulos, and Diopoulos' girlfriend, drove down to Little Italy and walked into Umberto's Clam House at 129 Mulberry Street, sometime around 4:30 in the morning. The restaurant had only been open 2 months. Gallo believed Little Italy was neutral ground.
There was an unwritten understanding among New York mob figures that the neighborhood was off limits for violence. A Colombo family associate named Joseph Luparelli happened to be sitting at the bar when Gallo walked in. Luparelli immediately left, walked 2 blocks to a nearby Colombo hangout, and told people Gallo was there. Within minutes, he had recruited Colombo associates Philip Gambino and Carmine Sonny Pinto DiBiase, plus 2 other men, to go back to Umberto's and kill Gallo. 4 gunmen entered the restaurant.
They opened fire.
Over 20 rounds were discharged. Gallo pulled his own weapon, flipped a table over as a shield, and fired back. He was hit in the left elbow, left buttock, and back. His bodyguard Diapolis was also wounded. Gallo staggered toward the door and made it onto the sidewalk before collapsing. He was taken to Beekman Downtown Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The gunmen got into a waiting car and were gone. Gallo's sister Carmela, standing outside the restaurant 3 days later at his funeral, told reporters, "The streets are going to run red with blood, Joey." They did. Gallo loyalists later hired a hitman to take out 4 Colombo associates believed to be behind the murder. The hitman went to a restaurant on East 79th Street, was told his targets were at the bar, and opened fire on 4 kosher meat salesmen who had nothing to do with the mob and had simply taken the same bar stools. 2 of them died. Nobody was charged for those killings either. As for Gallo's murder, Joseph Luparelli eventually came forward to police and described the attack, naming himself and the others. The NYPD dismissed his account. No one was ever charged. The case officially remains unsolved. Frank Sheeran, an Irish-American mob associate featured in Martin Scorsese's 2019 film The Irishman, also claimed before his death that he personally killed Gallo, a claim most mob historians dispute. The 2 accounts can't both be true. Neither produced a conviction. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case leaves New York entirely and goes to Chicago, where the former boss of the most powerful mob outfit in the Midwest was shot 7 times in his own kitchen while cooking dinner for the man who killed him. Sam Giancana. On the night of June 19, 1975, Sam Giancana was in the basement kitchen of his home at 1147 South Winona Avenue in Oak Park, Illinois, frying sausage, escarole, and sesame beans. Giancana had serious stomach problems and could no longer eat spicy food, which means he wasn't cooking for himself. He had let someone in and was making them dinner. That person shot him once in the back of the head, then rolled him over and shot him 6 more times in the face and neck. All 7 shots fired from a silencer-equipped .22 caliber pistol. His caretaker, Joseph DiPersio, found the body face up on the kitchen floor just after 11 p.m., the food still warm in the pan. A money clip with over $1,400 in cash was untouched in his pocket. No one has ever been charged. The murder of Sam Giancana remains officially unsolved 50 years later. Giancana was born Salvatore Giancana on May 24, 1908, on Chicago's Near West Side, the son of Sicilian immigrants. His mother died when he was 2. His father was violent and frequently threw him out of the house. By his early teens, Giancana was sleeping on rooftops and in gangways between buildings, and had joined a street gang called the 42 Gang, named after Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, with the reasoning that they were one better. He was first arrested in 1925 for auto theft. By age 20, he had been the prime subject of 3 murder investigations without being tried for any of them. The Chicago outfit noticed him. By the late 1930s, Giancana had been inducted into the organization under bosses Frank Nitti and Paul Ricca, with Tony Accardo serving as the power behind operations. Giancana rose steadily through the ranks as a getaway driver, earner, and killer. In 1957, Accardo stepped aside from day-to-day leadership, and Giancana took over as the operational boss of the Chicago outfit, one of the most powerful organized crime organizations in the country, with tentacles in gambling, labor unions, and politics across multiple states. Giancana's decade as boss was loud and eventful by mob standards. He drove a pink Cadillac, wore sharkskin suits, and a sapphire pinky ring he said was a gift from Frank Sinatra, and dated singer Phyllis McGuire of the McGuire Sisters. He was connected to some of the most significant events of the 1960s. The CIA reportedly approached Giancana and fellow mob boss Santo Traficante Jr. in the early 1960s about assassinating Cuban leader Fidel Castro, a set of plots that were never carried out. Some researchers have also alleged Giancana had a role in John F. Kennedy's narrow victory in Illinois in the 1960 presidential election, though this has never been proven. The FBI surveilled Giancana relentlessly throughout his time as boss. In 1965, he was called before a federal grand jury, refused to testify even after being granted immunity, and was jailed for a year for contempt of court. While he sat in prison, Accardo and Rica stripped him of his position and replaced him with Joseph "Joey Doves" Ayupa. When he got out in 1966, Giancana was no longer in charge. He left for Mexico, where he lived in Cuernavaca for 8 years to avoid further grand jury appearances. Mexican authorities eventually forced him out. In 1974, they put him on a plane and delivered him to federal agents at the border. He appeared before a federal grand jury in Chicago several times after that. By the summer of 1975, he had been subpoenaed to appear before the U.S. Senate Church Committee, formerly called the Senate Select Committee to Study Governmental Operations with Respect to Intelligence Activities, which was investigating CIA Mafia plots to assassinate Castro and possible organized crime connections to the assassination of President Kennedy. Giancana was scheduled to testify in the weeks following his murder. On the evening of June 19th, police officers had been assigned to guard Giancana's house. Those officers were recalled that night before the killing by persons unknown. Investigators never established who ordered them away. The prevailing theory among law enforcement and mob historians is that Giancana's own people killed him. ABC 7 Chicago's I-Team, which followed the case for decades, reported that mob historians believed the order came from outfit bosses Joey Ayupa and Tony Accardo. A key suspect was Dominic "Butch" Blasi, Giancana's longtime driver and one of his only confidants. FBI surveillance records showed that a car registered to Blasi or his family returned to Giancana's house that night after all other guests had left. Shortly after that, Giancana was dead. Former Chicago outfit hitman Nicholas Calabrese later told the FBI that Accardo had ordered the killing because Giancana had refused to share profits from offshore gambling operations in Iran and other locations with the outfit's current leadership. Giancana had apparently been running those operations independently since his years in Mexico and was keeping the money. Frank Calabrese Jr., son of another outfit enforcer, went further. He told WGN-TV in 2019 that his father had told him directly that Accardo himself pulled the trigger, using a silencer-equipped pistol that the elder Calabrese had manufactured. Accardo died in 1992. He was never charged with anything related to Giancana's death. Other theories have also circulated. Some have suggested the CIA killed Giancana to prevent him from testifying about the Castro plots, fearing what he might reveal about the agency's use of mob figures for government assassination attempts. Chicago mob historian John Binder told ABC7 that this theory is long on speculation and short on evidence, and that the most logical explanation remains that the outfit itself ordered the hit. The gun used in the murder was eventually found. On August 19, 1975, 2 months after the killing, a .22 caliber high-standard model M101 pistol with a homemade silencer was recovered on Cook County Forest Preserve property in River Forest, Illinois. FBI records later established that the gun had been purchased in 1965 at a Florida gun store, along with a second weapon later used in another mid-1970s mob killing. The gun's discovery led nowhere in terms of charges. Giancana was buried next to his wife Angeline at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. Angeline had died in 1954. By all accounts, Giancana never got over losing her and never remarried. The house on Winona Avenue still stands in Oak Park. The case is still open. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case moves from Chicago to Boston, where 5 men were found shot dead in the basement of a pub, including a former television news reporter, in a crime that has never been solved and may involve some of the most dangerous organized crime figures in New England history. The Black Friars Massacre. In the early morning hours of June 28, 1978, a janitor arrived at the Black Friars pub at 105 Summer Street in downtown Boston to clean the premises. The bar had closed for the night. When he got to the basement office, he found 5 men shot dead. Police described the scene as one of the bloodiest they had seen. Suffolk County District Attorney Garrett Byrne, who had been in office since 1952 and had seen a great deal, told reporters he had never witnessed a more shocking crime. 2 suspects were tried in 1979. Both were acquitted. The case has never been solved. The Black Friars was not a typical neighborhood bar. Located near South Station in the Leather District, it advertised itself as an after-work disco and was known to police as a regular meeting place for both Italian and Irish organized crime figures. The pub was owned by Vincent Solmonte, a Quincy resident with documented mob connections. The night manager was John Jack Kelly, 43, a former investigative television reporter for Channel 7 in Boston, who had spent years cultivating relationships with organized crime figures before leaving journalism. According to former colleagues, Kelly had been planning to leave the Black Friars in 2 to 3 weeks to return to television work as a freelance producer at WLVI-TV, Channel 56. He never made it. The 5 victims were Solmonte, Kelly, Charles Megarian of North Andover, Peter Maroth of Jamaica Plain, and Freddie De La Vega of Somerville. All 5 were shot in the head with either a .12 gauge shotgun or a .25 caliber automatic pistol. Investigators believed there were 2 shooters. Police found $15,000 in cash sitting in an unlocked safe, untouched. Significant quantities of cocaine and marijuana were also found at the scene. Rumors circulated almost immediately that the real target of the robbery was a much larger cocaine shipment. Some accounts put the amount at up to 4 kilograms, and that the drugs had been sold on the street within hours of the murders. The theory that emerged from the initial investigation was that a group of men had entered the Black Friars through the cellar after closing time, intending to rob the men of drugs and cash. According to crime writer Howie Carr, the robbery turned deadly when Kelly, who apparently recognized one of the intruders, said something along the lines of, "Is that you?" identifying the person by name. At that point, the decision was made that nobody could be left alive. The pub had a documented connection to both the New England Patriarcha crime family and the Winter Hill Gang, the predominantly Irish organized crime group, whose de facto leader at the time was James "Whitey" Bulger. On the evening of June 27th, the night before the bodies were found, Winter Hill gang member Stephen "the Rifleman" Flemmi had visited the Black Friars with a girlfriend named Marilyn De Silva. Flemmi spotted another gangster, Nick Femia, at the bar. According to Wikipedia's detailed account of the massacre, Flemmi sensed something was wrong and convinced De Silva to leave. His instincts were correct. He left and survived. The 5 men who stayed did not. 2 men were arrested on July 12, 1978. William Ierardi, 32, of Lynn, and Robert Italiano, 36, of Revere. Prosecutors told the jury that the 2 defendants had gone to the Black Friars that night intending to steal cocaine and cash, and that the robbery was set up after notorious art thief Miles Connor allegedly tipped Ierardi off that a large drug deal would be happening at the pub. Connor denied ever speaking to Ierardi. Prosecutors said the killing became inevitable when one of the victims moved suddenly and the thieves opened fire. The trial produced no conviction. Both men were acquitted. They remained the only suspects ever tried for the 5 murders. Whitey Bulger's name has appeared in connection with the case multiple times over the years. Retired FBI Special Agent Michael Buckley stated in court that he had told fellow agent John Connolly, who was later convicted of racketeering and murder for protecting Bulger, that Ierardi had admitted to fabricating the involvement of Bulger and Flemmi in the massacre. Whether that means Bulger was involved or that someone tried to falsely implicate him has never been definitively settled. Connolly was one of the most corrupt FBI agents in American history, a fact that casts a shadow over anything related to his handling of Bulger-connected information. Nick Femia, whose presence at the bar on the night before the massacre had alarmed Flemmi enough to leave, was a large, heavy-set man with a serious cocaine addiction and a volatile relationship with Bulger. He had become a Winter Hill associate in 1976. His exact role, if any, in the Black Friars killings has never been established in court. He died before the question could be fully explored. Jack Kelly's sister Kathy was on vacation in New Hampshire when she got the call. She rushed back to Massachusetts and went to her brother's house in Framingham to be with his wife and their young children. In a 2018 interview with the Boston Globe on the 40th anniversary of the murders, she described it simply: "It was just horrible." Kelly had been planning a comeback. He had a new television job lined up. He had spent years covering organized crime as a reporter and then working alongside the people he once wrote about. The line between those 2 worlds had become dangerously blurred, and on the night of June 27, 1978, it disappeared entirely. The Black Friars building at 105 Summer Street no longer houses a bar. The crime is listed as a mob-linked attraction on Boston.com's mob tour of the city. 4 men were tried in connection with the murders in total. 2 acquitted at the 1979 trial, and 2 others whose involvement was examined but never prosecuted to conviction. The 5 victims have never received justice. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case takes us to Phoenix, Arizona, where a newspaper reporter who spent his career exposing the mob was blown apart by a dynamite bomb in a hotel parking lot in broad daylight. And the question of who ultimately ordered his death has never been fully answered. Don Bolles. Don Bolles had been covering organized crime in Arizona for the Arizona Republic since 1962. He was good at it, methodical, persistent, and willing to go after people with money and power. By the mid-1970s, he had written extensively about the Chicago outfit's reach into Arizona, about dog racing tracks with suspected mob ties, about land fraud connected to politicians, and about a corporation called Emprise, later reorganized as Ram Corp, which had documented financial relationships with mob figures including Mo Dalitz of Las Vegas.
In 1974, the Arizona Press Club named him Newsman of the Year. By early 1976, Bolles had stepped back from investigative reporting and moved to covering the state legislature. He was 47 years old, married, and had a young daughter named Diane. He and his wife Rosalie had plans for the evening of June 2, 1976, dinner out and a screening of All the President's Men. He didn't tell her about the meeting he had scheduled that morning. A man named John Harvey Adamson had been calling Bolles with promises of information about a fraudulent land deal involving top Arizona politicians and possible mob connections. On the morning of June 2nd, Bolles left a note in his office typewriter explaining he was going to meet Adamson at the Hotel Clarendon at 11:15 a.m. and would return by 1:30 p.m. He drove his white 1976 Datsun 710 to the hotel. Adamson didn't show. After waiting in the lobby, Bolles walked back to the parking lot and got into his car. 6 sticks of dynamite, taped under the driver's seat, detonated as he started the engine. The blast shattered Bolles' lower body and blew the car door open. He was found half outside the vehicle, still conscious, bleeding on the parking lot pavement. According to people who were there, Bolles managed to speak before losing consciousness, saying, "They finally got me. Mafia, Emprise, Adamson. Find Adamson." Those words were reported by witnesses at the scene and later widely cited by news organizations covering the bombing. Bolles was taken to St. Joseph's Hospital. Over the next 11 days, doctors amputated both of his legs and his right arm in attempts to stop the spreading infection. Armed police officers stood outside his hospital room with shotguns. He died on June 13, 1976, 11 days after the bomb went off. He was buried in Phoenix. His 1976 Datsun, which had sat in an Arizona Department of Public Safety impound lot for 28 years, later became a centerpiece exhibit at the museum in Washington, D.C., before that museum closed in 2019. John Harvey Adamson was arrested on June 13th, the same day Bolles died, at a bar in Phoenix. He was a local low-level criminal with prior involvement in arsons and various scams, who also moved in political and organized crime circles. According to trial testimony, Adamson had purchased electronic components for 2 bombs during a trip to San Diego. He had also visited the Arizona Republic's employee parking area before the bombing and asked a guard which car belonged to Bolles. When police searched his apartment, they found magnets, electrical wire, and a copy of the Anarchist's Cookbook. Adamson eventually agreed to testify against 2 other men. John Harvey Adamson identified Phoenix contractor Max Dunlap and plumber James Robeson as co-conspirators. Dunlap, according to Adamson's testimony, had paid him $10,000 to carry out the bombing. Robeson was accused of being the triggerman, who remotely detonated the device from a truck parked on the street. Both Dunlap and Robeson were convicted and sentenced to death. Those convictions were overturned in 1980 on procedural grounds. Dunlap was convicted again in a 1993 retrial and died in a Tucson prison in 2009. Robeson was also retried. The legal proceedings stretched across decades. But the question that was never fully answered was who ordered the hit and why. Adamson's testimony pointed to Dunlap as the man who hired him, and Dunlap was connected to Kemper Marley Sr., a wealthy Phoenix rancher, liquor distributor, and political donor. Bolles had published stories in 1975 exposing Marley's undisclosed business ties that may have violated Arizona liquor laws and benefited from political favoritism. Marley had been nominated to the Arizona Racing Commission before the stories ran. He withdrew from consideration shortly after they were published. Marley was never charged in connection with Bolles' murder. He died in 1990.
Dunlap's own daughter, Karen Graham,
said publicly in 2023 that she believes her father was framed and that more powerful men were responsible. In the civil lawsuit Dunlap filed after his first conviction was overturned, multiple Phoenix police officers testified under oath that they had been told to destroy files related to the investigation, specifically pages touching on Adamson, the Emprise Corporation, and the Bolles case. The civil case ended in a mistrial, and when Dunlap tried to refile, the statute of limitations had expired by 1 month. The Investigative Reporters and Editors Organization, which had been founded just 1 year before Bolles was killed, responded to his murder by sending 38 journalists from 28 different news organizations to Arizona. They worked for months and produced a 23-part series in 1977 called The Arizona Project, exposing organized crime and political corruption across the state. It was the first large-scale collaborative investigative journalism project in American history. Bob Greene, the Newsday reporter who led the team, said afterward, "A reporter had been killed for doing his job, and throughout the country, fellow reporters responded. Nobody from the upper levels of whoever arranged the bombing has ever been prosecuted. The triggerman at the operational level, Adamson, died in 2017. Dunlap died in prison in 2009. Robeson died in 2016. The person or people who decided Don Bolles needed to die and who paid for it have never been publicly identified or charged." Bolles' last public words before his death, reported at the scene, were about the Mafia and Emprise. The investigation he gestured toward in those final moments was never fully completed. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The final case on this list goes back to New York, where the most feared hitman in Gambino family history was found frozen in the trunk of his own car, killed by the very men he had trained to kill for him. Roy DeMeo. Roy Albert DeMeo was born on September 7, 1940, in the Flatlands neighborhood of Brooklyn. His father was a laundry delivery man. As a teenager, DeMeo worked as an apprentice butcher at a local grocery store. He graduated from James Madison High School in 1959, already running a small loan sharking operation. His father died of a heart attack in 1960. By the time DeMeo was in his mid-20s, a Gambino crime family soldier named Anthony Nino Gaggi had noticed him and offered him a piece of something bigger. DeMeo accepted in 1966 and began building what would become the most prolific murder crew in the history of the New York mob. The operation was run out of the Gemini Lounge, a bar DeMeo owned at 4021 Flatlands Avenue in Brooklyn. The core crew consisted of DeMeo, Christopher Rosenberg, Joseph Testa, his brother Patrick Testa, Anthony Center, Henry Borelli, and Joseph Guglielmo. Testa and Center, who spent so much time together at the lounge, became known as the Gemini Twins. They were teenagers when DeMeo recruited them in 1974. The crew's method of killing became known as the Gemini method, and it was systematic. A victim would be lured into a back apartment connected to the lounge through a side door. DeMeo or another crew member would shoot the victim in the head with a silenced pistol and immediately wrap a towel around the wound to limit blood spray. A second person would stab the victim in the heart to slow the bleeding further. The body was then drained in a bathtub, dismembered, bagged, and disposed of, in dumpsters, at sea, or buried at sites across the region. The FBI estimated the crew was responsible for between 75 and 200 murders between 1973 and 1983. Many victims were never found. DeMeo's first confirmed kill for the Gambino family came in 1973. A pornographic film distributor named Paul Rothenberg, who had been paying DeMeo and Gaggi for protection, was arrested on obscenity charges.
DeMeo feared Rothenberg would cooperate with police. He invited him to meet at a diner, walked him to a nearby alley, and shot him multiple times in the head with a silencer-equipped pistol. The crew's rackets extended far beyond murder for hire. They ran a highly sophisticated international car theft operation, stealing 4 to 7 luxury vehicles per night from New York streets, retagging them, and shipping them overseas. They dealt cocaine and marijuana despite direct orders from Gambino boss Paul Castellano not to. They ran loan sharking operations and were connected to prostitution and pornography rings. DeMeo laundered money through his position on the board of directors of the Brooklyn Credit Union, where he had gotten himself elected as a member. The killing was not always targeted. In 1977, DeMeo and crew member Edward Grillo murdered a man named Mickey Spillane, the Irish mob leader whose control over Hell's Kitchen was blocking Castellano's construction interests near the Jacob K. Javits Convention Center. Spillane's death helped DeMeo broker an alliance between the Gambino family and the Westies, the Irish gang that took over Spillane's territory. That alliance was what finally convinced Castellano to formally induct DeMeo into the family in mid-1977. That same year, DeMeo killed an 18-year-old college student named Dominic Rigucci. DeMeo had mistaken him for a hitman sent to kill him, chased his car through Brooklyn, and shot him. Rigucci had nothing to do with organized crime. DeMeo reportedly wept afterward. By 1982, the FBI was closing in. A grand jury had subpoenaed DeMeo twice in connection with a racketeering investigation. Castellano, who had always viewed DeMeo as a dangerous liability and had repeatedly refused to formally recognize him as a made member before finally relenting in 1977,
now had a more pressing concern. He believed DeMeo might flip, cooperate with federal investigators to avoid a long sentence, and take the entire Gambino family down with him. The FBI had also planted a listening device in the home of Gambino soldier Angelo Ruggiero and picked up a conversation between Ruggiero and Gene Gotti, a brother of John Gotti, in which they discussed that Castellano had put out a contract on DeMeo. The problem was finding someone willing to execute it. Even John Gotti declined, reportedly telling associates that DeMeo had an army of killers around him. Castellano's protege, Frank DeCicco, was given the contract and couldn't get to DeMeo either. The job was eventually passed to DeMeo's own men, Joseph Testa and Anthony Center. According to former Lucchese acting boss Anthony Casso, who later became a government witness, Testa and Center agreed to kill their boss in exchange for their own lives being spared. On January 10, 1983, DeMeo drove to Patrick Testa's body shop in Canarsie, Brooklyn, for a meeting with his crew. He was wearing a leather jacket with a sawed-off shotgun concealed inside. He left behind his watch, his wallet, and his ring at his home. According to his son Albert, who wrote about his father's final days, DeMeo knew he was walking into a trap and went anyway. That night, he failed to show up at his daughter Dion's birthday party. His family began searching for him. 10 days later, on January 20th, 1983, a 1983 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, registered in DeMeo's wife's name, was found abandoned in the parking lot of the Varuna Boat Club at 2806 Emmons Avenue in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn. Police towed it to a nearby station and opened the trunk. DeMeo's body was inside, partially frozen from 10 days in the January cold. A chandelier from his Long Island home, which he had brought along to have repaired, had been placed on top of the body. He had been shot multiple times in the head. There was a bullet wound in his right hand, consistent with throwing his hand up in a defensive reflex when the shooting started. Paul Castellano was indicted for ordering DeMeo's murder as part of a broader federal racketeering case. He never went to trial for it. In December 1985, Castellano was shot dead outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan, killed on orders from John Gotti, who then took over the Gambino family.
Anthony Gaggi, the man the mob museum identified as the one who opened fire on DeMeo, died of a heart attack in 1988 while standing trial on racketeering charges. He was never convicted of DeMeo's killing. Joseph Testa and Anthony Center were convicted in 1989 of racketeering and 10 murders and sentenced to life in federal prison. DeMeo's murder was not among the charges they were convicted of. Both were paroled, Center in 2023 and Testa in 2024. No one has ever been convicted specifically for killing Roy DeMeo. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.